Hi everyone, and welcome to the Conscious Eating Evolution series. I'm Karina, Conscious Eating Catalyst and Soul Relationship Guide, and I have created this series to give you a more holistic overview around the power of food, so you are enabled and feel more empowered to make healthier and more mindful choices for yourself and this planet. And today we're going to take a critical look, or eye, on pesticides, science, and big industry with Carey Gillam. And Carey is a veteran journalist, researcher, and writer. She has 17 years experience with Reuters. She is research director for the NGO US Right to Know, a consumer group whose mission is pursuing truth and transparency in America's food system, and has dedicated over 20 years of her life uncovering the dealings of Monsanto, and published in 2018 the book Whitewash, the story of a weed killer, cancer, and the corruption of science. She was instrumental to bring the dangers of glyphosate to public attention. So, Carey, thank you so much for being here and joining us on the Conscious Eating Evolution.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great. So, to have a kind of common ground, who is Monsanto? What is glyphosate? What is Roundup? What is Roundup Ready seeds? And how did you actually end up or started to spend over 20 years of your life with the dealings of Monsanto?
Okay, a lot of questions.
Yes.
So gosh, I would be surprised if no one has heard of Monsanto. But you know, there might be people out there who haven't. Monsanto is now a unit of Bayer. They were purchased last summer by the German company Bayer, the big pharmaceutical company. But for over 100 years, Monsanto was a very well-known name and a very big player in chemicals and industrial chemicals, and then agricultural chemicals, and then seeds. Monsanto, at the time it was purchased by Bayer last summer, was actually the world's largest seed company. They moved from chemicals into agriculture, and with their product Roundup, glyphosate-based herbicides, and with genetically engineered seeds that Monsanto introduced primarily to sell more Roundup herbicide. They introduced these genetically engineered seeds in the 1980s, and you know, they've really become popular around the world, primarily in the US and South America. But I became involved in all this in 1998. I was a banking reporter working in Atlanta, Georgia, and Reuters asked me to move. Reuters is an international news agency. They asked me to move to Kansas and start covering this new agricultural phenomenon, the new genetically engineered seeds sort of revolution in agriculture, and to learn everything I could about Monsanto, the rivals that they were going up against, DuPont and Dow, and other companies who were really trying to sell their products, seeds and chemicals, into the agricultural market and changing food production really as we know it. So that became my job in the 1990s, and that's what I've done ever since, and that's how the book came to be. Monsanto's herbicide Roundup is based on the active ingredient glyphosate. Glyphosate was introduced and patented by Monsanto in 1974. And is the active ingredient Roundup and hundreds of other brands, actually. But it has become the most widely used weed killer, the most widely used herbicide in the world. A large part of that is because Monsanto introduced these seeds that were designed to be sprayed directly over the top with Roundup, with glyphosate-based herbicides, soybeans and corn and cotton and canola, alfalfa, sugar beets, things like that. So, you know, this is billions and billions of dollars that have been made for Monsanto over the years. But with the use of this chemical, and this is what my book tracks, with the use of the chemical rising over the years to become really so pervasive now, our government researchers are finding it in rainfall, even in our soil, in our water, in our air, in our own bodies, in urine samples. It's prevalent in the food supply, according to the testing that's been done. And with the pervasiveness of this, scientists have studied the health effects, and they're finding really scary stuff. They're finding carcinogenic impacts, ties to non-Hodgkin lymphoma in particular. They're also finding reproductive impacts, problems with birth outcomes for people who've been exposed to it. So, and then there are a whole host of environmental problems that scientists have documented. And that's what led me to write the book, because I've done stories over the years, hundreds and hundreds, but the book really puts it all together and introduces the people who are dying, who have died, the scientists who have been trying to raise alarm bells. And importantly, the book also lays out how Monsanto has worked really hard for 40 years to hide all of these risks. And they've really done some ingenious things and adopted a lot of the tactics of the tobacco industry to try to manipulate the scientific record. And I get into a lot of that in the book. So did that answer the questions?
It went way,
okay.
way more into it. So, like, what were the major findings while you were really beginning to investigate and, do your research? Because you went in it with like no knowledge about food and food industry, right? Whenever you started, and you really looked with non-bias into the entire field, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, when I first started, as I said, I was a banking reporter, and I didn't really know anything about food production and agriculture and farming and that sort of thing. But because that became my job, I had to become steeped in it. I had to spend so much time. I've been literally in hundreds, perhaps thousands, probably thousands of farm fields over the last 20 years, from Canada to Florida and California, and all over the country, visiting with farmers, visiting with scientists, and I guess the first things, the problems that first started to become apparent were environmental. The science pretty clearly documented a host of environmental problems associated with this widespread use of this chemical. And I want to make clear that people understand, I'm not saying that this chemical by itself, is the scourge of all of mankind and food production. Glyphosate and Monsanto is really the poster child, I've come to find, for a bigger problem about pesticide use in agriculture. We've created a food or a pesticide dependent food production system, and each different pesticide carries with it an array of risks to our health and to our environment. Weed resistance is a particular problem that we've seen with Monsanto's products. Because they've been so widely used as weed killers, the weeds have become resistant. We now have over 100 million acres of weed resistance that farmers are having to deal with. And that means lost production for them, added costs. It also means many times they're using additional pesticides and more pesticides. We're seeing the loss of pollinators. We're seeing a degradation in soil health. We're seeing pollution of our waterways. This particular chemical, glyphosate, is found by our government researchers in surface waters, and as I mentioned, in rainfall. That's where it all began, was a look at the environmental impacts, and then the health impacts have simply built on the concerns.
Wow. And so whenever you began connecting more with the farmers, what were they beginning to experience while using the pesticide or the herbicide?
So and an herbicide is a pesticide.
It's a pesticide, yeah.
Yes. Pesticide is sort of an umbrella term that includes insecticides, fungicides, herbicides, rodenticides. So the farmers, I mean, the thing that most concerns farmers, if they don't have cancer, if they're not sick and they're healthy, the thing that most concerns them is, of course, the effectiveness of this product. Is it working? And as I said, over the years, primarily because it has been the most widely used, because it's been so pervasive, it isn't working as much anymore. Insecticides are doing the same thing. If you use them over and over and you don't, in agriculture, in Mother Nature, if you don't kind of mix things up and you don't kind of keep things changing, Mother Nature adapts. That's what happens. And so weeds adapted and became resistant. And that's what I mentioned earlier, over 100 million acres now. And it just continues to spiral. The companies, Monsanto and others, have decided that the answer to this is simply more pesticides. So what they have done in recent years is developed new genetically engineered crops that you can spray directly, not only with Roundup, but also with things like dicamba, which is an older herbicide, and 2,4-D, which is another older herbicide, an herbicide that was part of Agent Orange that was used in Vietnam. So these pesticides are now being sprayed directly over many of our crops to deal with the weed resistance problem. But of course, scientists are saying, well, now you're going to create weeds that are resistant to those chemicals as well. It's sort of a chemical race to nowhere, a pesticide treadmill we're trying to get off of, I think.
And is there a lot of research being done because it's not just glyphosate, right, that is spread, it's like all the other chemicals as well. And then you have an entire cocktail of chemicals combined, and we don't know what like all of them actually together do for the health or to the environment. And can you say anything more about that?
Right, and many scientists are very worried about this, particularly in the diet, in our food and in our water, because people who use these, who buy these products and are spraying them on their farm fields or lawns and gardens, they're sort of active users, and they know they're being exposed. Now, they may not understand the degree of the risks, but at least they are voluntarily exposing themselves. In the food supply, we are involuntarily being exposed, right? And so you probably don't know that when you sit down and you give your child, a bowl of fruit for breakfast, you don't know that bowl of fruit may have residues from 30 different pesticides in it. But that's what our government data shows us. In the US, FDA and USDA are the regulators who measure this. In Europe, you have other regulatory agencies. In Canada, every country measures the food supply for pesticide residues, and our regulators know that they exist. They tell us not to worry about it, but a number of scientists have been publishing studies in recent years showing that pesticide residues in our foods are directly related to problematic health impacts. And we have one insecticide called chlorpyrifos that's out there in the food supply, pretty prevalent. It was marketed by Dow Chemical, made a lot of money, still makes a lot of money for these companies. And it's known to be damaging to children's brains who are exposed to it. Children who are exposed either in the womb, when their mothers are exposed, or when they are young. It's neurodevelopmentally damaging. It was supposed to be banned in the US 2 years ago.
But it's still out.
But Dow Chemical has lobbied so hard to keep it on the market, and it's still out there in our food supply. And it's found largely in fruits and vegetables. They think are healthy.
So how does it happen that the regulation system, like the FDA, the USDA, the EPA, that system which is, where the protection for the public should come from, why is it not working? And especially, for example, with glyphosate, I think they're still not testing it whenever they, look for residues in the food. It is still not on the list of, if it's found or not, right?
Right. I mean, there's a lot of political pressure that comes to bear on regulatory agencies, not only in the US, but also in Europe. That's what the evidence shows us. And in Canada, I mean, everywhere, political pressure on regulatory systems is sort of an expected thing, perhaps. It's not a good thing, but we know that it does happen. And, these companies are very powerful, and they work very hard to convince regulators to pursue and protect practices and policies that benefit these companies. And so in the example of glyphosate and Roundup, glyphosate residues in foods in the US are agencies, USDA and FDA, who are supposed to test for pesticide residues, have not tested for glyphosate for decades. They haven't wanted to do it. People, they've been told to do it. They don't want to do it. The FDA has only now started, and they've published one little tiny bit of data, but consumer groups around the world are finding glyphosate residues in a whole array of foods that we eat every single day.
So it's like, for example, whenever you look at the Dirty Dozen list, it actually is nonsense, right? Because there are a lot of pesticides that are not even being tested and that might be found in the food, but it's not. So it's not, for example, whenever you buy a papaya or whatever, it has been tested on certain things, but maybe not on other herbicides or anything similar that might be even more harmful or effective.
That's a really good point, right? If you're not testing for a certain pesticide, then there's a lack of data about what's actually going on. And in the US, we had an interesting situation that I reported on. And the only reason I knew about this was because of Freedom of Information documents I obtained from within our Food and Drug Administration. But it showed that a chemist there was testing for glyphosate. He pulled in honey samples and oatmeal samples and things, and he found glyphosate at very high levels in honey. He found it in baby food oatmeal products, and he reported this to his supervisors, and they essentially told him to just don't worry about it and be quiet and go away. And they did not put that in any official data reports. The only reason we know about it is because, again, I was able to obtain these documents from inside the agency. And what did transpire, they didn't do anything about glyphosate residues. They didn't report it to the public, but they did reassign this chemist and instruct him not to do any more residue testing on food looking for glyphosate. So it's that kind of atmosphere that we have where, our regulators don't want to give us the answers that we're due. And why is that? Is it to protect corporate interests? Probably so.
Yeah. So why did it take so long that all these information finally came to the surface? How did Monsanto, did they cover it up? Did they manipulate science? What happened actually?
Right. Well, that's after 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. There's so much to talk about there.
Yeah.
The company, as I said, they've employed a lot of tactics that were used by the tobacco industry, sort of perfected this manufacturing of doubt, sort of suppressing of scientific information. Monsanto, I could give you one example. Well, there are many, but one recent example. So the International Agency for Research on Cancer in 2015 looked at a lot of published peer-reviewed scientific studies and said, it looks like glyphosate is probably carcinogenic. They classified this chemical that makes so much money for Monsanto as a probable human carcinogen. And Monsanto, you can see in their internal documents, we've obtained a lot of internal documents through litigation and Freedom of Information Act, show that they set in motion a plan to discredit these scientists, to make sure that regulators around the world discounted and disregarded, and that this classification by these very elite scientists was seen with scorn and was invalidated. And their internal records show they spent about $16 million just to discredit these scientists, and they did it in a variety of ways. They sent marching orders to different soldiers, I call them secret soldiers, front groups and individuals, academics and others that are out there in the world, people who look like they're completely independent of Monsanto, but secretly are in communication and often are getting money and funding and direction from the company about what to say, how to say it, who to talk to, what policies to push. It sounds like a really crazy conspiracy, like a crazy movie. But it's not. It's what's been going on, and it's what the documents from inside Monsanto very clearly show us, that they have created this network. They call it a scientific outreach network around the world They don't want people to know that they're behind it. They're funneling money all over the world to try to convince people that their products are safe, that scientists who say that they're not safe are crazy, that journalists like me are wackos who don't have, real information. And, they're engaging in a whole host of tactics to confuse regulators, to confuse the public, and push these products literally down our throats.
Yeah. And it's like, especially with the manipulation of science, that's like the most, like, that's where we gain the most truth from, or try, to get different solutions. So whenever, you manipulate that, like, what should people believe in anymore, right? It's like intended confusion on that end as well, in a way.
It's very hard, right? I mean, there are two sort of things to talk about with that. With regulators who approve these products, they largely rely on not independent science, but actually the science that's produced by the companies that are going to sell the products. And that's a big problem, because these studies are not published, they're not peer reviewed, they're confidential business information. And when they do come out and we are able to see them, invariably they show that the product is safe. Now, you compare that to independent studies that that the International Agency for Research on Cancer looked at, and they are usually the ones that find the problem. So what Monsanto has been doing is saying, okay, well, we need published papers out there that show it to be safe. So what they've been engaging in, what we see from their internal documents, is what they call ghostwriting. And that's where they are writing the paper, writing all the sections about genotoxicity and laboratory tests and things, and they're writing about how safe the product is. But then when the paper is finished, it doesn't say it was written by Monsanto scientists. It says it was written by, these other people who don't work at Monsanto and who appear to be independent, and money is directed towards them. And it looks like it's a peer-reviewed, published, independent paper, and it's not. And that is a manipulation of the scientific record. It's an intentional manipulation. We had another recent example came out with that, with a series of papers that were published in a journal, and we see very clearly that even though the paper said Monsanto had nothing to do with them, didn't review them, didn't do anything, we see internal documents from Monsanto where they're doing the writing and the drafting, and they're talking about how they're changing things and what they're adding, and it's just blatant deceit upon the scientific community.
Yeah, and you actually spoke in front of the European Parliament last year in 2018, right? And
it was 2017, yeah.
Oh, 17. Oh, okay. So it was actually before. So actually, in Germany, it was about to be banned, and then glyphosate was about to be banned, right? And so what happened, it got another 5-year approval of usage, despite the facts that were already presented to the public and to the board. Isn't the public in kind of ways being fooled? Isn't that it's like it's so challenging to see that even the facts are presented, that still for example, the European Parliament is still approving it for another 5-year extension and just pushing the decision out into the future over and over again. Do you have a take on that?
Well, the European Parliament, has been, there are different parties, obviously. I was asked to come and speak as one of 7 experts to testify, and that was October of 2017. And that was because they were trying to decide, should glyphosate be renewed? Should it be re-licensed and reauthorized for use throughout Europe? They were very concerned. They had 6 scientists, pretty evenly split in terms of those who work for the government, or one who testified who we know has been a paid soldier for Monsanto. You know, and I testified as well as to the documents and what they show. And the European Parliament did vote then to ban glyphosate. They did decide to do that. Now, they are not the only deciding body in Europe, obviously. So the European Commission came down to a very, very narrow vote. Now, the industry had wanted relicensing for well more than 15 years. They were looking for a very long relicensing period. The European Commission could not get a qualified majority of votes from member states for a long-term extension, and this battled back and forth. And you know, as I'm sure you know, it came down to Germany to sway the final decision. The German ag minister came in and voted for relicensing at the very last minute, and so it has been relicensed for 5 years in Europe. But people are paying attention. France. France is looking to ban it. Germany is looking to ban it. Many other countries are aware that people are saying, we're seeing the documents, we're seeing the dangers, we don't want this in our food. So I think people are waking up, certainly.
Finally, yeah. Yeah, and can you take a little bit, or talk a little bit more on the health effects on the pesticides, or especially glyphosate, that you especially have found doing your research and while you have been speaking with the farmers? How did this all end up, or what did you find?
Well, the glyphosate and Roundup, one of the problems, you know, I think if this pesticide had been, if the dangers and the risks had been accurately communicated from day one, and people knew that they really needed to wear protective gear and they really needed to be cautious about letting this get on their skin, you know, or drift back onto their face. If they understood the science that Monsanto knew, that showed about the dermal absorption rates and the surfactants and how it gets absorbed into the body very quickly and into the system where it can do cellular damage. You know, if people knew that and protected themselves, we probably wouldn't be where we are today. A large part of this was because Monsanto marketed it as so safe and rejected any notions or any desire for warnings on its products. And that's what's allowed it to be sprayed directly over our food crops because it's been sold as so very safe. You know, in terms of what you're saying, the health impacts, as I said, there's some studies that show that women with glyphosate, that show glyphosate levels in their urine, pregnant women have worse birth outcomes than pregnant women who do not test positive for glyphosate in their urine. So scientists have said that that shows perhaps an association, what it might be impacting. There are scientific studies that show that glyphosate impacts the beneficial gut bacteria, and that, right, and this can affect the immune system. I mean, that can create a whole host of problems. And of course, there's the science that links it to cancer. Very early on in the 1980s, Monsanto actually, one of their secret unpublished studies that they presented only to regulators, when the EPA looked at it, they said, well, all of these, you know, look at all of these mice who are exposed, who are getting tumors. This looks like it causes cancer. So even back in the 80s, but Monsanto was successful in convincing our regulators, our EPA, basically to discount their own scientists. The EPA overrode its own toxicologists to favor Monsanto's assessment that those tumors were not dose related, and those tumors in those mice, you just don't worry about that. It was not a sign of carcinogenicity. And you know, that's what you've seen over the years. I write about that in my book, study after study after study, especially animal studies. The rats and the mice, and you know, they get tumors in their livers and or kidneys, or they have reproductive problems. I mean, it's you know, there's been a lot of evidence to show that this stuff is not good for us.
Yeah, so the science is pretty clear.
Well, you know, Monsanto would argue no.
Would argue that, yes, of course.
Would argue that it's not at all. But 2 juries now, you know, have come back and said that, yeah, it is pretty clear. It causes cancer.
Yeah. And so, so in 2018, Monsanto was actually acquired by Bayer, right? and which is a German multi-international pharmaceutical company, and which is actually one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. And I kind of find it a little bit cynical that a company that actually produces pharmaceuticals and treats cancer buys a company that is causing cancer. And isn't that it in itself like a huge wake-up call, and just the public being fooled here? I like, what's your take on that?
Right. I mean, I've heard people speculate about that, and it is, you know, and potentially really ironic, I guess, or maybe intentionally beneficial situation. I don't know. I mean, Monsanto's products, obviously, they have a lot more than Roundup. The seed technology, they have developed specialty seeds that, you know, have other benefits, and they have a lot of vegetable seed product, and they have technology that was very profitable, and Bayer wanted a piece of it. So, you know, we can speculate they want to cause cancer so they can sell more pharmaceuticals. But there certainly were a lot of legitimate reasons for them to want to buy this company and bring it into their portfolio. Investors, on the other hand, though, are not so happy right now. After the first jury verdict, you know, there are 11,000 lawsuits right now in the United States, 11,000 people suing Monsanto, and by virtue of its purchase, Bayer is now liable. And, you know, the first two to go to trial have found in favor of the plaintiffs. And so Bayer's share prices are way down. They've taken a big hit. They're losing a lot of money in market valuation. And, you know, I get investors reaching out to me saying, you know, gosh, what lies ahead here? Because Monsanto Bayer keeps telling investors, don't worry about this. You know, we've got this. Those jurors are wrong, you know, and all that science is wrong. And, but, you know, the jury verdicts, we'll see. But we've got two now against Bayer Monsanto, and another trial starts at the end of March, and there are many more coming in April and May and later in the year. And so
that's a lot. We'll see. Yeah. So what is it actually that you think that we can do? What is it like? What changes are the ones that we can, as you know, participants, humans, do in general that can support us in, you know, preventing being affected as much? Or what can you tell us about that?
Right. Well, you know, as a journalist, I mean, my job, my hope, my passion, my desire is that by bringing forward truthful, relevant, timely information, it will be beneficial to people, right? It will be beneficial to public policy and to our own health and to the environment. So, you know, different people, what I've seen is different people react differently to the information. A lot of school districts are trying to remove these pesticides, Roundup in particular, and then other pesticides from their, you know, maintenance routines. They are looking to free themselves of this pesticide dependence, and by virtue of that, you know, improve the healthful environment for the children who are going to these schools. You're seeing certain cities and little townships around the world say, we're not going to spray this in parks and playgrounds where kids play anymore. You know, we'll take the dandelions, you know, or other sorts of weeds, but we don't need to expose our kids who roll around in the grass and play sports and things on these areas where we're spraying all these chemicals. And you know, and certain people obviously look to the food supply and want healthier food, and pesticides are not part of a healthy diet. So if you want to be free of pesticides, you probably want to buy foods that haven't been treated with pesticides. And that, you know, there's a whole scale on that. You could go full scale organic, or you could be looking for things that maybe they're not certified organic, but you know the farmer, you know how they, you know, practice and produce their food. Maybe some, you know, some people are trying to grow more of their own fruits and vegetables. I mean, you know, and a lot of people want to go marching, you know, in their nation's capital and call for stronger policies. you know, it depends on where you are, what the information means to you, and you know, how important it is at this point in your life.
Mm. So one personal question, how like did all this research affected you on your personal decisions regarding food? And where did you actually come from?
Oh, you know,
In
I
that
mean,
sense.
I ate whatever tasted good, right? I mean,
Okay.
before, and I mean, right now it's when you have this much information and when you read these giant government data reports that list out all of the different chemicals that are coming into our food and they're finding in our food, you know, going to the grocery
Hard to
store is
ignore, right?
not a pleasant experience. Um, but I am more informed. So I know, for instance, that I want the berries that I feed my kids every morning. They love berries. I want them to be organic. You know, I want to support, you know, pasture raised, free ranging, you know, poultry producers. And, you know, I want to be more protective and proactive about creating a safe future for my kids is my main thing. You know, I have 3 children. I love my children. I want my children to have a world to grow up in that is healthy. I want them to be healthy. I want their water to be healthy and their air and their food. And I mean, that's what I think about, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. So when like where can people find you when they would want to like to know more about you? Can you tell us?
Twitter, I'm big on Twitter. No, I have a website, careygillam.com,
Yeah.
CareyGillam.com. I'm on Twitter pretty actively, sharing news and information and data and documents and you know, all sorts of information that way. And the group I work for, the nonprofit US Right to Know, usrtk.org, we work really just to gather documents and data, these Freedom of Information report requests, and then we provide access to documents for free to the public. So other reporters use us, lawmakers, policymakers, consumers. You just go to our website and find out, you know, information about sugary sodas and what the CDC is doing and not doing to protect you on that, or what the FDA is doing and USDA and EPA, and you can follow all the court documents about, you know, the Monsanto Roundup cancer trial. So, and Facebook.
Awesome. And you actually do have a free gift to share with us, right?
Oh, yes. So if anybody wants to check out the book, the publisher, Island Press, has put together the first chapter, the introduction and the first chapter for free on a particular link that we're providing. So people don't have to read the whole book. They can just read the beginning and see if they're interested that way.
Yeah, so sneak peek and then buy the book.
It is an audiobook too, right? So you don't even have to just buy the hard copy. I know a lot of people just prefer to plug in some headphones and listen.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. So my last question to you is, you are working in the field of positive change, and I just want to know from your side, what is your message, because I'm asking that every speaker, what is your message of hope to the audience that are listening today?
You know, information is power, right? I mean, when we are armed with the facts and when we fully understand the risks that come with the rewards of these products that we're taking into our lives, we can make better choices, we can make healthier choices, and we can share that information with other people. So clearly people are interested, people are engaged, and you know, we just got to keep doing what we're doing and fighting to protect our children's future.
Thank you. I love that. Carey, what I love so much about you is your dedication and devotion to the truth. And I honor the work that you've done, that it was really a service-oriented piece of work to the public. So a wholehearted thank you from my side to you. And I thank you all for watching and joining us today. And please, please, please stay tuned for more incredible content on how to eat to improve your health, empower your spirit, and thrive with the planet. Thank you. Bye.